Welcome back, Time Crunch fans. I'm your host, Coach Adam Pulford. Well, I hope you've had your fill of all the latest scientific cycling banter like durability and fat oxidation. The past podcast series was a good one for sure, but I think it's time to get back into some Q&A. For those just joining us for the first time, welcome. On this podcast, we try to take all the complicated training information on various topics and condense it down into short, actionable episodes. Many of the questions and topics come from our audience members, such as yourself. So as you're out on a training ride, or you're reading a book or an article on cycling, or you're listening to some other podcast and you think of a question to ask, simply head on over to trainright.com/podcast and click on Ask a Training Question. Those questions get sent directly to me, and we do our best to answer it on future episodes. And that is what we're going to do today. So here is a latest question. I thought it was an awesome question to ask because it definitely relates to the time crunchedness that I think a lot of cyclists out there experience. So let's hear the original question. Here it is. Adam, thanks for the helpful training information on your podcast. I have two related questions. Your focus on time crunch athletes who train 7 to 8 hours per week. Unfortunately, I usually have only about 4 hours or less to train, so that's 3 or 4 days for 30 to 60 minutes. I suspect that there are many cyclists who listen to your podcast who are like me, and they wish they had 8 hours to train. Yeah, they probably are. I mean, there's a ton of super time-crunched athletes out there, and that's what I'm going to call you. This is coming from Will. That's what I'm going to call you, super time-crunched cyclist. So question number one, is there any benefit to doing zone 2 on a day where I only have 30 to 40 minutes to train? I am trying to follow the 80-20 zone 2 format that has been discussed, but I rarely have a lot of time any day of the week. Most of the conversation about zone 2 references benefits to rides that are 2+ hours or longer. I almost never have that much time to ride. So that's question number one. Question number two, I also try to follow the 2 hard days, intervals, etc., and the rest of the zone 2 format. But what do you recommend if I only have 2 days to train total? What if I have 3 days? Do I prioritize the interval training on zone 2 days? Thank you, Will. And yes, thank you, Will, for submitting that question. So overall quick answers. Yes, there is still benefit in doing zone 2 endurance training, even when you're super time crunched like yourself. Because you are a low volume athlete, you can incorporate more intensity more often and you'll benefit from it. Okay, that's one of your advantages of being a super time crunched athlete. You can have more days or more total increased frequency of intensity, and because your overall volume is so low, you're not going to get overly fatigued by that, assuming that you're going to be sleeping and eating properly. Okay, so but in the end, my best recommendation is to follow a program that will cycle through various intensities or all of the intensities throughout the year so that you still develop your fitness, your performance, your energy systems, and you're as complete of an athlete as possible. So let's get specifically into the answer of question number one. You ask, do you still get the benefits of zone 2 when you're even doing like shorter durations? When you do aerobic exercise, when you move, when you sweat, you are getting benefit. So don't let the perfection of what you hear about zone 2 and all the media sources that you're listening to and reading get in the way of you actually just exercising and being healthy. Move, sweat, and enjoy the fact that you can move and sweat. If you can truly embrace that with no judgment, you're already going to be a very healthy person, mentally as well as physically. So will you get the benefits on longer rides? Yes. But if you can't do the longer rides, why are you even going to worry about it? So just know that you're burning calories, you're building aerobic fitness, and you're being healthy when you move and you sweat. So again, there's benefits there on zone 2 training, and I don't think that you need to overcomplicate it with more than that. Now, without seeing your exact training program or 80-20 program that you've either set up for yourself or maybe you got something online, I'm guessing that your intensity days are pretty hard and your zone 2 days are pretty easy. And I know I've kind of spoken on this in the podcast before, but for anyone who may not know, generally speaking, 80-20 refers to 80% of your training will be easy aerobic or like zone 2 in a 6-zone system, and 20% will be hard, whatever hard means according to the coach or who's ever writing the training program, but generally race pace, VO2 max, or something higher. Okay. So if we take Will's example here of his longest week, which let's say 4 hours total, because that's what he said. And for the sake of some easy math, let's say 4 days of 1 hour per day to get that 4 hours total. The 80-20 would come out to 3 hours and 12 minutes at zone 2 or easy aerobic and 48 minutes at a hard intensity, whatever hard is. So this is good. This is good for a while, okay? Especially with high intensity and when you want to bring out some race performance. But in my opinion, you need to change it up. Variety is a key training principle, which means you must add in variety at the right times and at the right times of the year for the body and energy systems to keep being stressed or stimulated, and then rest and you adapt and you improve. If you just keep following the same method, 80-20 or whatever it is, year round, you'll be missing out on one of the biggest bangs for the buck, in my opinion, which is threshold training. So with a super time-crunched athlete such as yourself, I would at the very least have a month where you focus on threshold training as the main focus. Then the next month, maybe you go back to 80-20. You could simply go back and forth like this for several months. Just take a recovery block of 5 to 7 days in there before switching over. So what this could look like is up to 3 days per week with as much threshold or zone 4 training, which is 91 to 105% of FTP, as you can tolerate. Then you cool down, and that's it. That's your workout. Okay. So to get there, okay, here's a starting workout for you, Will, or for anybody who's in a similar position. You start with a short warm-up, 7 to 8 minutes of zone 2 riding. Then you do 3 by 8 minutes at threshold, and I'm going to put it at 91 to 101% of your FTP. And then I'll encourage you to take 3 minutes recovery in between. Let that be anywhere between 0 and 50% of your FTP. You cool down for 3 or 4 minutes, and that's a 45-minute workout. What I want you to do is work up to 30 to 40 minutes straight through of low threshold work, simply by progressing the interval durations, such as 2 by 12, 2 by 15, and then, or decreasing and minimizing or getting rid of the recovery periods so that now we're just 30 minutes straight of threshold. And that's going to be a great bang for the buck. So yeah, what that would then look like is 8 to 10 minutes for a warm-up, 30 minutes straight threshold, 5-minute cool down, and there's a 45-minute workout. You can do a workout like that at least 2 days a week, if not 3, and sometimes even 4. For my super time-crunched athletes, I have them doing 4 days a week of intensity like that if we're focused on threshold training. And that will definitely move the needle forward. Because keep in mind, like I said before, one of your unique opportunities as a super time-crunched athlete is your training volume is not so much that you need to worry about an overtraining aspect. As long as you're sleeping 7 to 8 hours per night, you're eating normally, and you're keeping, stress in check in your daily life, that much training is not going to cause a problem. Okay. Now, if you have 2 to 3 days of intensity like this in a threshold block, and you have another day of riding that you can do, that's where you do your zone 2 endurance ride for 45 to 60 minutes. Now, during a threshold phase like this, if you're super time crunched and you only have 3 hours to train, you can also just skip that endurance day. Okay. And the reason for that is if you are flipping back and forth or switching back and forth between like an 80-20 and then this threshold phase, you're going to get plenty of endurance work in the 80-20 block of training or the month of training. And so you'll be getting in kind of the important aerobic training that will go in there. But if I'm super time crunched, such as yourself, and I've got 3 days a week, I'm going to hit threshold every single day. Now, the glycolytic energy system is what we are training when we're doing zone 4 threshold training. It's the energy system that you can increase the most in a short amount of time. For example, you can increase, for an amateur and a beginner, you can increase your FTP from 10 to 20% in 6 to 8 weeks by using a program like this. I would probably do a little bit more volume overall, but 10 to 20% is a conservative estimate for beginners and amateur cyclists. Threshold training also provides more training stress score per minute than zone 2 training without adding the strain and fatigue that sprints and VO2 max intervals do the following day. Therefore, you'll find that you can do much more of this training, like overall back to back and week after week, and you get really fit from it. And it'll not leave you totally wrecked or blown out like VO2 max will, especially if you're only doing, like I said, 4 hours total per week, sleeping and eating normally. So the zone 2 endurance day will still keep adding fitness and still keep adding benefit, but you'll also have a day in there too, and this is super important, where you don't have to perform, okay? So mentally as well as physically, it can be relaxing just to have a day where you're not focused on, hitting the intervals hard and hitting some sort of performance achievement, staying in zone and all that kind of stuff. So just ride your bike, and that's really healthy too. Now let's get to specific answers on question number 2. Now that is pertaining to if you're trying to hit that kind of that 80-20 sort of prescription of 2 hard days per week, and you only have 2 days. What if you have a third day? That's what we're talking about with Will. Now, if you're following that 80-20 training program, follow it. Generally, I find that modality that we're talking about, so like a polarized training sort of modality, it is a very good training program, so long as you're keeping your hard days hard and your easy days easy. And that means if you only have 2 days per week with hard intensity, do that. Don't sacrifice it. And because that intensity, that's what's going to make you improve. That's what's going to cause the stress or the stimulus. Then you rest, then you're going to get better. So if you have a third day, that's where I would do endurance. If you have a fourth day, again, without seeing your actual training program, I might add in maybe a little bit more intensity because, again, total volume is low. However, 2 hard days and 2 endurance days, that's not a bad training program. Now, focus on your hard interval days first. If I were coaching you, I'd ensure that the hard days are VO2 max or harder. And VO2 max, that would refer to 106 to 121% of your FTP. And harder intensity, it gets pretty individualized, the way that I work my coaching program. But what that means is a perceived effort of 9 or a 10 out of 10. So I'm going to maximize the total amount of time in zone to cause fatigue in order to make improvements with you. That's how I would do it. Still do your zone 2 training. Like I said, you'll get benefits from that, both aerobically and metabolically and mentally. Okay. But remember, doing this all the time is not what I recommend. Change it up. Cycle your intensity throughout the whole year, and you'll have much better results overall because you'll become a better overall rider, and you'll become just physically more fit and well-developed. Now, I'll leave you with this final super time-crunched training program idea, and it's very basic. I'm not going to get into the details, but you can start to think about cycling your intensities like this. January, focus on endurance and tempo. Okay, so that would be perceived effort of 4 to 6 out of 10 for endurance and maybe 6 or 7 for tempo. In February, you could go into an 80-20 phase right here where you focus on VO2 max, so really hard. Okay, and this is super time crunch. We're talking 4 hours, maybe 5 hours. And you have those 2 days really hard, and that's going to be a 9 or a 10 out of 10 for the hard days, and then endurance for the other. Come around March, that's a threshold focus where you deploy everything that I just talked about in this podcast. In April, cycle back to endurance and tempo, and you just keep on cycling through, making sure that you hit the start of the next block fresh by taking 4 or 5 days super easy or off, or however you want to define your recovery block. That is how I recommend to keep on cycling through, keep it fresh, adding variety to a training program, and that's going to do enough of a dose for you to get an adaptation from, and it's going to add in variety enough to create different stimulus throughout the year so that your body doesn't get used to any certain thing. So in summary, I'll leave it there. Will, that was a really good question, and I think that on various podcasts we tend to speak to a lot of maybe time-rich athletes or even the time-crunched athletes, which a lot of people are doing 6 to 8 hours of training, and for those who are doing less than that, you have some challenges, but as I alluded to, you also have some unique opportunities where you can really get away with more days of intensity, especially at tempo, sweet spot, or threshold, and start to rack up fitness in that way. You just have to keep on cycling things throughout the year so that your body doesn't get used to any one thing. So I hope that's really helpful to you, and I hope that's helpful to the rest of our listeners. There's more Q&As here to come, but in the spirit of being time crunched, I'll leave it there right around 15 minutes. So thanks, everyone. Keep the questions coming, and come back and check us out next week.